Okay, thank you very much. We have questions after all those three contributions. We continue with Monika Motylińska, and we remain to the concrete industry, but focus on its global and imperial dimension in the 20th century. We thus move a little further away from building or the artifact as in co-production of material cycles, energy flows and geosystems, and instead consider its economic, political and ecological impacts in specific local contexts. Monika Motylińska is an architectural and urban historian interested in the cycles of architectural production in the 20th century, especially in the global south. Since 2020, she has been teaching at the Institute for European Studies at the Bauhaus University Weimar. Since January 22, she has been leading an interdisciplinary research group on histories of the built environment at the IRS in Erkner. She's the project manager of the project Conquering with Concrete, German construction companies as global players in local contexts, and the joint project Constructing Transport Architecture in West Africa. Now, Monika Motylińska on the topic Cementing a Success Story from Dessau, ? Welcome, Monika Motylińska.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm very honored to be part of such a great lineup today. Without further ado, I will move to the chapter in the story of Polisius Dessau. The most globally successful export product from Dessau has not been Bauhaus, but rather machinery for cement plants, at least if the sources of the local manufacturer, Polisius, are to be trusted. Thanks to Kim and his insightful talk, I don't need to introduce the protagonists of my contribution. Instead, I will shift the focus towards the links with the Global South and Sub-Saharan Africa specifically, where production of cement became a conditio sine qua non and a meta-infrastructure for the imperial expansion in the long 20th century. With this, I indicate a clear correlation between the establishment of cement plants and mills and the emergence of industrial nodes and hubs. Polisius capitalized on the ever-rising demand for this material both by aligning itself with the German colonial project and by seeking customers globally through a vast network of representatives and participation in trade fairs. The company proudly referred to this colonialist, imperialist, and capitalist portfolio of projects also subsequently as the state-owned GDR enterprise, as this brochure from the late 1950s exemplifies. This talk shall focus on the ventures of the company into Sub-Saharan Africa in the first half of the 20th century, beginning with the plans for a cement plant near the port city of Tanga in German East Africa, nowadays Tanzania, which were of vital importance for the German territorial conquest and were picked up by the British and then Tanzanian actors subsequently. From there, it will move to Lubudi, where a solo kiln, the site in Dessau, became a high-end technology in the service of the Belgian extractivist agenda in the Katanga region, nowadays a Democratic Republic of the Congo. Finally, it will continue to the Bulawayo in southern Rhodesia, nowadays Zimbabwe, to shed light on the entanglements between cement production, infrastructural projects, and power structures in southern Africa. What I'm presenting today is based on my ongoing and more precisely never-ending research on the history of cement manufacturing and production, which started 10 years ago here in the State Archives of Saxony-Anhalt, Landesarchiv Dessau. I'm indebted to many supportive colleagues across different archival and academic institutions, and it would take way longer than 20 minutes to acknowledge all of them, but let me credit Hannah Leroux, who is with us here today, as well as Gabi Mohale, head of WIT's Historical Papers Research Archives in Johannesburg, and the archival team from Landesarchiv Dessau, as well as my colleague Andreas Buter, without whom this research wouldn't have been possible. Last but not least, Robbie Fivet has been a part of this continuous undertaking as a co-author. What may amount to a fairly neat narrative about a particularly successful global player is contingent on privileges and of mobility and substantial funding, and thus, to put it bluntly, it also reproduces the inequalities it aims to analyze. This problematic aspect is one I would like to address in the follow-up discussions today. But moving on to the first station of my presentation. Cement plants were perceived by colonial powers as necessary meta-infrastructure for large colonial investments, especially in the domain of transport infrastructure. From 1909 to 1913, the German firm Polysius drew up plans for a cement production site in Pongwe in German East Africa. The plans include a limestone quarry, the cement factory with surrounding housing facilities for the European personnel, and 2 railway stations. In preparation, the firm's engineers thoroughly mapped the topography of the terrain as well as the lime and clay deposits. Had it been erected, the Pongwe facility would have been among the first cement plants in sub-Saharan Africa. German colonial officials deemed the site of Pongwe crucial for both the construction of the Usumbara railway and the extension of the nearby harbor in Tanga. As early as 1891, the stations Steinbruch, so stone quarry, and Pongwe were constructed along the line. Meanwhile, the firm Polysius, as we heard, had already established itself as a specialized global player before World War I. However, in Pongwe, it faced competition from Vogtländische Plantagengesellschaft, an export-oriented agricultural operation seeking to expand by branching out into the production of construction materials. Both companies aimed to acquire plots between the Steinbruch and Pongwe stations, where a disused limestone quarry already existed. After a flurry of correspondence between Polysius headquarters in Dessau and the colonial government, the company managed to secure a concession in 1910. Under the terms of this public-private partnership, the colonial government and the company constructing the railway, Koloniale Eisenbau Bau- und Betriebsgesellschaft, were permitted to acquire limestone and other mineral products from the quarry. The colonial bureaucracy purposely ignored the pleas of the second firm. However, correspondence between the owner of the enterprise from Dessau, Otto Polysius, and his notary in Dar es Salaam reveals that rapid construction had never been the company's intention, a scenario different from the official publicity brochures. On the contrary, the aim was to postpone the investment for as long as possible in order to accumulate sufficient capital and stock. The only reason for hasty bidding was to outplay the competitor, so Vogtländische Plantagengesellschaft. But now, faced with an unfeasible schedule, the unfulfilled contract was terminated in 1913, and German cement plant in East Africa never came into being. However, a cement factory would eventually be erected in the same location, although not by the British, but rather only after Tanganyika's independence and the emergence of Tanzania. This may testify to a certain path dependency and certainly to the persistence of the addiction to cement, to quote Julius Nyerere. And this case clearly demonstrates how the territories of colonial expansionist planning were simultaneously sites of speculation for capitalist firms whose ambitions extended beyond national boundaries into colonial territories, which is a phenomenon that Mark Lindner and recently also Nina Kleinöder investigated in their respective studies of the internationalization of a construction industry. Yet the actual first major wave of investment in the African cement industry occurred shortly after First World War, when Germany was no longer directly involved in the colonial project. This also meant that Polysius had to navigate a more challenging market without the backing of the German state. During this period, colonial officials envisioned and built numerous transport and industrial projects across colonial Africa, including harbors, dams, and railway lines. These projects served to buttress the extractive economy and to deepen, oftentimes very frail and superficial, control over territory. To provide material for the construction of infrastructure, colonial officials cited cement plants across sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, in Rufisque near Dakar, in the French colony of West Africa, nowadays Senegal, and in Matola, close to the capital of the Portuguese colony of Mozambique, Lourenço Marques. It was the first plant in 1920, later on also, by the way, equipped by Polysius. European engineers emphasized the importance of increasing the capacity of local cement production in order to reduce transportation costs. For them, local production of construction materials was the necessary prerequisite of strengthening, in other words, cementing colonial power, which, as Robbie and I posit, follows the logic of meta-infrastructure. A focus on the Belgian Congo provides a case in point, as it was among the earliest to produce cement on the African continent. Already in 1932, a French cement producer observed with some degree of jealousy that due to the installation of 2 cement plants in the early 1920s, quote, in these privileged regions, that is Belgian Congo, the works in concrete and reinforced concrete can be executed with a minimum of uncertainty or disappointment and with a minimal cost, unquote. Perhaps we can speak here of a particular learning experience that accounts for the substantial investment in modern technology. As in the case of the first Belgian cement plant in the Congo, erected in Lukala along the Matadi-Kinshasa railway line, the outdated second-hand, by the way, also German machinery, proved to be not only inefficient, but also disastrously dangerous, in consequence, bringing the company to the brink of bankruptcy. This might at least partially explain why, for the cement plant in Lubudi, which was of strategic importance to the entire mining industry in the province of Katanga and beyond, and which rapidly developed in the 1920s, engineers opted to install a newly patented model of a solo rotary kiln designed by the firm Polysius. As described in the advertisement brochure, this technology proved to be safe and efficient, so that, quote, from the start, the plant is working without any trouble and to full satisfaction of the committers, though it is operated by the natives under the supervision of a European staff reduced to the minimum admissible, unquote. In addition to such rhetoric of progress, the brochure provides relatively rare depictions of factory employees. Strikingly, the visual propaganda of the German company also includes a local staffage of sorts, as the external view of the cement plant was embellished with drawings of straw huts, supposedly built in the direct proximity of the plant, even if the photographs from the time proved this wasn't the case. However, from the company's perspective, such exoticization was deemed necessary to embed the project in the local landscape, even if it was imagined. By the way, in the case of cement and lime industry, erection of living quarters, both for native and white labor, in a comfortable walking distance for the plant seems a rather common practice at that time, when dust was considered a nuisance, but not yet a health hazard. It was, for instance, quite important that the manager was able to take his lunch break at home and then walk back to the factory. More importantly, one of the aims of these lavish multilingual brochures was to demonstrate the reliability of a company's technology under allegedly challenging circumstances, in this case to a client for whom the choice of a German manufacturer was surely not self-evident. Yet beyond the publicity, the renommée of Polysius at that time is confirmed by different sources, such as the Rhodesian Mining Journal, which referred to the well-known maker of cement plants in their detailed description of the plant, describing also the whole production process. This particular source shall also lead us to the third station of this story, namely Bulawayo in southern Rhodesia, where Polysius, or rather its famous product, the Lepel kiln, entered the scene following a decades-long debate about the need to modernize the country's sole cement plant. This case study shifts the vantage point from a German cement plant manufacturer to the major player in southern Africa, namely Pretoria Portland Cement Ltd, for short PPC, founded in 1892 as the first on the African continent. It acquired the Rhodesian company in 1928 as part of its regional expansion. Due to its close links with the Barrel Rand mining conglomerate and associated companies, PPC offers an insight into very close, and to borrow from Hannah Leroux, parochial networks of extractivism, which seem a typical feature of the globalizing construction industry across very different regional contexts in the long 20th century. What is significant in this case, is the proximity or even actually overlap between the mining and the construction sector in terms of ownership, capital, but also technology and know-how. In terms of the archival sources, the Barrel Rand collection, now at Wits University, complements the rather scattered information on Polysius' involvement in southern Africa available at the Landesarchiv in Dessau and raises new questions. More importantly, it offers a valuable glimpse into the workings of racial capitalism on the ground. Accordingly, in the following, we will briefly examine a couple of crucial aspects. PPC's acquisition of the cement plant in Bulawayo was a milestone in strengthening its position in southern Africa with the intention to expand into Central Africa. It was a move carefully considered, preceded by a wealth of detailed reports on the state of the plant and the raw material deposits, also maps, and accompanied by favorable media coverage. Yet behind the scenes, the picture was all but neat. The limestone quarrying was conducted under gravely dangerous conditions where the threat of bodily harm to the black employees was deemed collateral damage or a liability to the investor. The observations about the condition of the cement factory itself should be taken with a grain of salt, though, as it is impossible to gauge the extent to which they also served to lower the acquisition price. To complicate the situation, the chemical reports on the quality of cement proved to be rigged, which forced the new owner of the plant to act quickly in order to regain dissatisfied customers. In the process of tightening the control, the decision-making shifted to Johannesburg and for crucial financial matters also to London, where the tight-knit network communicated in closed rooms, while new capable managers dealt with the situation on the ground, increasing the efficiency of the production line, but also implementing strict measures of spatial segregation within different types of housing on the compound. While doing so, they paid close attention to developments elsewhere, for instance in Lubudi, which was perceived as a direct competitor. The need for modernizing the plant and installing new equipment was already contemplated in 1927, and many improvements were carried out over the years. However, it was not until 1951 that the new Lepel kiln was installed, and after some initial difficulties proved to be a game changer. And interestingly enough, in the Anglophone context, this technology was still considered a novelty, even if it was already 2 decades old by then. The reports claim that Lepel kilns were in use at that time in at least 3 major cement plants in South Africa, with PPC's Hercules plant in Pretoria among them. which begs the question to what extent the company from Dessau, or after World War II, its newly funded West German counterpart from Neubeckum, was indeed involved in the planning, or whether the Leppel kiln became a larger-than-life success story. To briefly conclude, grounded in archival sources from Dessau, Brussels, and Johannesburg, this talk aimed to demonstrate how the addiction to cement has been part and parcel of the imperial ambitions and undertakings of racial capitalism, and how the global player from Dessau was instrumental to it. To understand how entrenched extractivist approaches to the industrialized or large-scale production of ubiquitous construction materials have transcended particular political settings and the agendas of individual actors, shifting the vantage point to the intermediaries and the mundane workings on the ground is a crucial step. It adds nuance to the story of how cement became a seemingly inevitable material in modern construction. On the reverse side of the logic of profit and progress, however, the immediate and long-term harm to both organic and inorganic matter has rarely entered business narratives, at least until recently, yet it is impossible to overlook. Thank you very much.